Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Amelia Rose adjusted the hem of her vintage lilac dress for the third time, tugging it gently, as if trying to stretch her confidence along with the fabric. The lobby of the Cresthaven Estate Hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers and a warm golden glow that clung to everything like expensive perfume. It was a place meant for polished shoes, last names with weight, and silk, that whispered wealth with every step. She didn't belong here. Not really. Sophia had begged her to come. Her childhood friend, the bride's cousin, and now one of the bridesmaids spinning through the crowd in chiffon and charm. "You'll love it," she'd promised, "and I won't know a soul if you're not there." Amelia had agreed, despite the pit in her stomach that always followed her into rooms where elegance was currency. Inside the grand ballroom, people sparkled. Women floated past in gowns that caught the light like water. Men in tuxedos sipped champagne from glasses that looked like they'd never been washed by hand. A string quartet played something classical in the corner, Vivaldi maybe, and laughter curled into the high ceilings like smoke. Amelia was gently ushered to a round table at the farthest corner of the room. Table 7, as the little white card announced, was clearly an afterthought. The kind of place you put the guests who didn't quite fit. To her right sat a teenage boy glued to his phone. To her left, a woman in her 72nd who nodded off between courses. Across the table, two middle-aged men seemed locked in a silent competition of who could avoid eye contact. The longest, she sat, folded her hands in her lap, and gave the room a practiced smile. Polite, pleasant, unassuming. Her dress, a find from a thrift shop, looked modest but charming in daylight. Here, under the chandeliers, it seemed faded. The once delicate lace looked tired, the shoes slightly too tight. She had pinned her hair into soft waves, hoping it would feel romantic. Instead, she just felt out of place. The worst part wasn't being alone. It was being invisible. She watched Sophia from afar, dazzling and effortless in her pale green gown, surrounded by people who knew which fork to use and how to glide across a marble floor. Amelia glanced down at her untouched salad, poking at it like it might offer her company. She took a sip of lukewarm water and tried not to shrink in her chair. She reminded herself that she was not here to impress anyone. She was here for Sophia. She had a warm heart, a quick wit, a gentle laugh. That should have been enough. Still, her chest tightened with the ache of not being noticed, not just tonight, but in life. She arranged flowers for a living, helped others celebrate their most beautiful moments, and then quietly disappeared once the petals fell. That had become her rhythm. Bloom for others, wilt in silence. A burst of laughter erupted from one of the central tables, and Amelia looked up. The centerpieces there were twice as tall, the people twice as loud. Confidence seemed to drip from their conversations. Her gaze drifted to the dance floor, where couples swayed in synchronized perfection. Spinning under the soft lighting like scenes from a movie she hadn't been cast in, she pulled her phone from her clutch, pretending to scroll, pretending not to care. But then something shifted. It wasn't a sound, more like a silence. A breath held, a hush, subtle but undeniable, rolled through the room like the quiet before a storm, and then she saw him. He stepped into the ballroom like he owned the air. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored black suit with a dark gray tie, loosened just enough to look dangerous in the most polished way. His presence didn't demand attention. It absorbed it. A ripple moved through the guests as eyes turned. Whispers followed, but he didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. His eyes, green and piercing, swept across the room, slow and deliberate. Amelia's heart stuttered. She dropped her gaze, suddenly too aware of how alone she looked. But something in the air told her not to move. She dared one more glance, and that was when it happened. He was walking toward her. She blinked. Was he? She checked over her shoulder, half expecting someone more glamorous to be behind her. But no. He stopped right beside her chair, leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, the faintest hint of cedar cologne. Then, in a voice rich and calm, he asked, "Is this seat taken?" Amelia's throat went dry. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "No, no," she said. Flustered, she motioned toward the empty chair beside her. "Please." He smiled, not the kind of smile that apologized or excused itself. No. This one was intentional, curious, disarming. And then he sat at table 7 with her. For a moment, neither spoke. The rest of the ballroom buzzed on, but Amelia felt like they had stepped outside of it, into a quieter place, into a space that didn't follow the rules of chandeliers and champagne. She noticed details. The way his cufflinks shimmered like the sky before rain. Their scar on his left temple. The way he looked at her, not through her, not around her, at her. "I'm Lucas," he said simply. Extending a hand, she took it. "Amelia. Nice to meet you, Amelia," he said, his voice curling around her name like it belonged to something important. "I was late, and I needed an escape route. You seemed like the safest bet." She laughed, genuinely, the sound catching her off guard. "Escape route from the madness? From relatives who think marriage is a finish line? From women trying to match me with their daughters?" This table seemed calm. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You chose the misfit table on purpose." He leaned in slightly, conspiratorially. The best stories usually start at the wrong tables. She didn't know what surprised her more, that he'd said it or that part of her believed him. And just like that, the night shifted. She was no longer the invisible girl in the faded dress. Something in her chest stirred. Not nerves, not fear, but the first flicker of being seen. Really seen, for the first time, in a very, very long time. The chair beside her gave a soft creak as Lucas settled into it, and Amelia could hardly believe it was real. She tried to breathe normally, but every cell in her body was suddenly alert, as though someone had turned up the brightness on the room. She glanced sideways, pretending to adjust her napkin, stealing another look at the stranger who'd so effortlessly disrupted her quiet invisibility. Lucas. His name echoed in her thoughts, foreign and familiar all at once. He reached for the glass of water in front of him and took a sip, like he belonged there at this neglected table with its half-eaten salads and forgotten guests. Amelia noticed how even his smallest movements were deliberate. His fingers were strong, his nails neatly trimmed. A man who paid attention. She cleared her throat gently. "So, you're not a fan of the main festivities?" He smiled. A slow, thoughtful kind of smile. "Let's just say I've already met my quota of fake laughs and small talk for the night." His voice had a smooth timbre, warm but slightly tired. Amelia tilted her head, intrigued. "And yet here you are at a wedding." "My best friend's wedding," he clarified. "I couldn't skip it, but I didn't sign up for the matchmaking committee or the business pitches between courses." "You got business pitches at a wedding?" she asked, raising a brow. "Oh, yes," he said with a chuckle. "One guy tried to show me a real estate deal on his phone while we were toasting the bride." Amelia laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that shook her shoulders. "That's tragic." "Exactly," Lucas said, watching her. "That's why I came looking for a different kind of conversation. And here you are." There was something in the way he said it. Not flirtatious, not exaggerated, just genuine, like he actually wanted to be there. Like this moment wasn't an accident. "You might be disappointed," Amelia said lightly. "I'm just a florist who was dragged here by her best friend." "I don't think that's disappointing at all," he replied. "Besides, I like flowers." She smiled, her fingers brushing the rim of her water glass. "Do you? Grew up around them?" "Actually, my mother had a greenhouse. Orchids, mostly." She swore they had moods. "She's not wrong," Amelia said, a spark lighting in her chest. "They do. Some bloom better when you talk to them. Others just want space." Lucas leaned in slightly, resting an elbow on the table. "What do you do when one refuses to bloom at all?" "Patience," she said without hesitation, "and a little faith." Their eyes locked then, just for a second too long, and Amelia felt something shift. The music, the clinking glasses, the chatter, it all faded into the background. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said after a beat. "Sure. Do you always sit at the corner table and make the rest of the room look like it's missing something?" She blushed, startled by the unexpected compliment. "You don't even know me." "I'm trying to," he said simply, "but I'm already glad I came late." She didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't often someone saw her so directly, as if her presence wasn't just noticed, but appreciated. Most people looked through her, past her. He was doing neither. "Where's your seat supposed to be?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He shrugged. "Up front, next to the groom, but he won't miss me for an hour or two." "You're a groomsman." "Guilty," he said, smiling again, "and guilty of desertion. That's kinda risk. Worth it, I think." Their conversation drifted into gentle, curious exchanges. He asked about her favorite flowers. She talked about the way peonies made her feel like spring could start again. He told her about a trip to the Scottish Highlands where he got lost and ended up having tea with a shepherd's wife. They laughed about weddings, about awkward toasts, about how both of them had nearly left early tonight, but neither of them had. Time, like the music, seemed to loop in soft circles around them. The longer they talked, the less Amelia noticed the rest of the ballroom. She stopped shrinking into her chair. Her spine straightened, her voice softened and warmed. At one point, a waiter approached and tried to discreetly whisper something in Lucas's ear. "Mr. Sterling, the family is asking." Lucas lifted a hand. "Tell them I'm exactly where I want to be." The waiter hesitated, then nodded and stepped away. Amelia blinked. "Mr. Sterling, Lucas Exaled." "Right. I suppose that's fair to explain. My name's Lucas Sterling. I run a company. A few, actually." She tilted her head. "You say that like you're trying not to sound like a CEO. I'm trying not to sound like a cliché," he replied. "But yes, I own Sterling & Co. We're in tech, real estate, investments, boring stuff." Really, her mind reeled slightly. She'd heard that name on a billboard, in an ad, maybe in a headline once. She tried to keep her expression neutral. But he noticed. "You okay?" "Yeah, just." She laughed, nervously. "That explains the waiter and the tux that fits like it was sewn on you. I prefer when people don't know. It's exhausting being seen for your bank account." Amelia looked at him then, truly looked, and she realized he wasn't exaggerating. For all his polish and confidence, there was a weariness behind his eyes, a quiet kind of loneliness. "Well," she said gently, "you're safe at table 7. Here, you're just the guy who likes orchids." He chuckled, something softening in him. "Good. I needed that." A sudden shift in the lighting signaled the start of the first dance. The bride and groom swayed in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by applause. Amelia watched them. The way the bride's dress floated like a cloud, the way the groom whispered something that made her smile. Lucas turned to her. "Do you dance?" She blinked. Not well." "Perfect. I don't either." He stood and offered his hand. Not insistent, not flashy, just open. "I won't step on your toes," he promised. Her heart pounded. She hadn't danced in years. Not in a room like this, not with a man like him, but something inside her said yes. She took his hand. And everything changed. The dance floor was a glowing stage beneath 1,000 tiny lights. Amelia stood just beyond the golden edge, her fingers still wrapped in Lucas's. His grip was warm, confident, but not demanding. He wasn't pulling her. He was waiting for her to choose. She hesitated for a moment longer, her heart thumping in her ears, then took a step forward, and then another. He led her gently onto the floor, their steps in sync, though neither of them had said a word. The music shifted into a slow, almost haunting melody, a cello piece wrapped in soft piano notes. Around them, couples moved in smooth, practiced rhythms. But Amelia was barely aware of anyone else. All she could feel was Lucas's hand resting lightly at her waist, his other hand guiding hers with surprising care. "You're doing better than you warned me," he murmured, his voice close enough to stir the fine hairs near her ear. She smiled nervously. "That's because you're not stepping on me." "Yet," he teased. They laughed, and something broke open between them, not in a dramatic way, but gently, like the slow parting of curtains after years of darkness, the kind of laughter that makes your body remember what it's like to be light again. As they moved, Amelia dared to look up into his eyes. They were greener under the ballroom lights, like moss caught in sunlight, and he was looking right at her. Not at the room, not at the other dancers, not at his reflection in the polished floor, but at her. Like she was the center of his attention, like she mattered. "So," he said, tilting his head, "Amelia the florist, tell me something you've never told anyone at a wedding." She blinked. "That's very specific." "I know," he replied. "It makes it more interesting." She thought for a moment. "Okay, I've always wanted to run away with the wedding cake." He raised an eyebrow, clearly delighted. "The whole cake? Every tier?" "That's impressively bold." She shrugged. "People spend hours tasting samples and designing the perfect cake, and then barely eat it. Seems like a waste. You'd be doing the world a service." "Exactly." He laughed, and it was a full sound, deep and genuine. "I like the way you think." She smirked. "Your turn. Come on, Sterling. Confess." He leaned closer. "Fine. I once switched the playlist at a wedding mid-reception." "No." "Yes. What did you put on?" "Bohemian Rhapsody. 3 times in a row." Amelia gasped. "You're a menace. And proud of it," he said, his mouth curling into a half grin. They continued dancing, lost in their own world. Amelia noticed how her nerves had quieted, how her body had stopped bracing for disappointment, how she felt for the first time in ages like she wasn't performing. She wasn't being the reliable friend, the modest girl, the invisible seat filler. She was just Amelia, and Lucas seemed to like that version of her. "I have a theory," he said after a pause. "Oh boy," he chuckled. "I think some people meet like flint and steel, lots of sparks, but they burn out fast, and then some meet like roots finding each other underground." She tilted her head, curious. "What kind are we?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I like the way this feels." She didn't answer, not with words, but her fingers tightened around his hand. Eventually, the song faded, replaced by something faster, more lively. The dance floor erupted into motion. Lucas stepped back slightly, reluctant to let go. "Want to keep going?" he asked. She glanced around. "I think we just survived one song without major injury. Might be best to quit while we're ahead." "Fair point," he said, offering his arm like a gentleman. "Shall we retreat?" They returned to table 7, now oddly warm in its familiarity. Amelia's water glass had gone untouched. Her salad was even less appetizing than before, but none of it mattered now. As they sat, the air between them remained charged, but in a calm way, like a storm had passed and left behind the kind of silence that feels sacred. Lucas rested his elbow on the table and looked at her. "You're not what I expected. Good or bad?" "Unexpected doesn't need a label," he replied. "It just stays with you." She smiled softly. "You're not what I expected either. Because I own companies?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "Because you sit at tables like this when you could sit anywhere." He seemed to study her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "I sit where I find something worth staying for." It hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She looked down, brushing a non-existent crumb from the tablecloth. "You know," he continued, "it's strange. I've spent years walking into rooms like this, filled with people, noise, performances, and I've never wanted to stay as much as I do right now." Amelia looked up. His eyes hadn't moved. They were still on her. A strange warmth spread through her chest. She should have been skeptical, defensive. But something about the way he spoke, the way he didn't try to impress her, made it hard to keep her walls up. "What happens next?" she asked, half teasing, half curious. Lucas leaned back, thoughtful. "Well, I'd offer to buy you dinner. A proper one, with real conversation and less glitter." She laughed. "That sounds nice. I'd like that too." They sat in silence for a beat. The kind that didn't feel awkward, but full, pregnant with possibility. Then, someone called Lucas's name from across the room. It was the groom, waving, clearly wondering where he'd disappeared to. Lucas glanced at Amelia, then back at his friend. "I should go say hello," he said, a little reluctantly. She nodded. "Of course, go be a groomsman." He stood, slowly adjusting his cufflinks. Then he turned to her. "Don't disappear." She blinked. "He won't." He smiled. "Good." And with that, he walked away, weaving through tuxedos and sequins, leaving behind the scent of cedar and something harder to define, something she couldn't name yet. Amelia sat there, her fingers still tingling from where they had touched. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but it felt like something rare, something she didn't want to lose. When Lucas returned, it wasn't with the casual stride of earlier, but with an almost magnetic focus. His eyes found Amelia across the room, like she was gravity, like something in him recognized exactly where to go. She was still at table 7, tracing the rim of her glass with the tip of her finger, lost in thought. She looked up and saw him coming, and for the briefest moment, she forgot how to breathe. "You stayed," he said softly as he pulled the chair beside her. "I said I would." He smiled. "I don't always believe people when they promise things." "Well," she replied, tilting her head. "Maybe tonight's the exception." A familiar slow rhythm began to play. The kind of music that fills a room with quiet anticipation. Not flashy, not loud, just intimate. Lucas's gaze drifted toward the dance floor, then back to her. "Can I tempt you into another?" Her pulse quickened. "Even after I told you I'm a terrible dancer?" He stood and extended his hand. "Anyway, I'll take my chances." And something about the way he said it, unrushed, steady, sure, made her heart move before her feet did. She slid her fingers into his, allowing him to guide her once more into that soft golden space where chandeliers sparkled like stars, and the world quieted just enough to hear your own heartbeat. This time, he held her a little closer, and this time she didn't pull back. Their hands found each other naturally, and his other hand rested gently at the small of her back. There was nothing hurried in his movements. No show, just presence. He was there, she was there, and the music carried them. Around them, couples danced with practiced grace. But Amelia wasn't watching. She didn't care about anyone else's rhythm or elegance. She was too consumed by the way Lucas moved with her, how he anticipated her weight before she shifted, how his touch was confident but never possessive, like he wasn't leading her but discovering the dance with her. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Do what?" "Make me feel like I've done this before." He smiled against her temple. "Because you have. You just forgot." She swallowed hard, unsure whether it was the music or his voice making her chest ache. As the dance unfolded, their silence became the loudest thing between them, not uncomfortable, not hesitant. It was the silence of something building. His fingers brushed the back of her shoulder, then moved as if by instinct to tuck a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His knuckles skimmed her cheek as he did it, and she leaned just slightly into the gesture. Her breath caught. So did his. "I don't usually dance at weddings," he murmured. She pulled back just enough to look at him. "You're pretty good at pretending you do." He chuckled. "Maybe you're just easy to dance with." Their gazes held longer this time. There was a stillness in the space between their faces, a fragile closeness that hummed with possibility. Amelia didn't know if it was appropriate. She didn't know if anyone was watching. And for the first time in her life, she didn't care. She was in the arms of a man who had sat beside her when she had been invisible, who asked real questions, who listened, who danced with her like she mattered. The song slowed, then faded. They stopped moving, but neither of them stepped away. His hand lingered on her back, her fingers curled just slightly into his, and there, beneath the chandeliers, Lucas leaned his forehead softly against hers. No kiss, no pressure, just presence. "I could get used to this," he whispered. She smiled with her eyes closed. "Me too." The lights dimmed further as another song began, something livelier, a signal for more energetic guests to take over the floor. Couples passed them with laughter and heels clicking, and finally, Lucas stepped back, but not far. "Let's get some air," he suggested. Amelia nodded, grateful. Her emotions had tangled themselves into a quiet knot, and she needed to untie it before it spilled over in front of everyone. He took her hand again, gently, like it was something he'd done 1,000 times before. They slipped out a side door that led to a terrace draped in string lights. The cool night air kissed Amelia's flushed cheeks, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting it settle her. The terrace overlooked a garden still fragrant from summer blooms. Amelia leaned on the railing, breathing in the mix of roses, ivy, and fresh grass. "Better?" Lucas asked beside her. She nodded, her voice quiet. "I didn't expect tonight to feel like this." "Me neither." They stood in silence again, their shoulders barely touching. Amelia could feel the electricity between them, not sharp, but low and steady, like a current running beneath everything they weren't saying. "I've been to a lot of weddings," he said finally. "Most of them feel like performances." She turned to look at him. "But tonight," he continued, "felt like something real happened." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Lucas turned toward her, and this time there was a question in his eyes. Not a push, just a space, an invitation. "I don't want this to be the last time I see you," he said simply. Her throat tightened. She wasn't sure if it was fear or hope. "I don't either," she whispered. They stood there, the moon casting silver light on their shadows, both aware that something had changed, something had shifted the minute he sat beside her. And now nothing felt the same. "I'm not good at casual," she said suddenly. "I get attached. I feel too much. I overthink." Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Good. The world needs more of that." She blinked up at him. "You don't think that makes me hard to love?" He shook his head, slow and steady. "I think it makes you unforgettable." And Amelia, who had always played the supporting role, who had always danced on the edges of other people's stories, felt for the first time like she was at the center of her own. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But as they stood on that terrace, side by side beneath the stars, it felt like a promise was being made, unspoken, fragile, but true. And somewhere deep inside, Amelia knew this was only the beginning. The night had deepened into that hushed hour, where the air felt heavier, quieter, when even laughter softened, and the chandeliers began to dim like tired stars. Amelia returned to the ballroom with Lucas, his hand still resting lightly on her lower back as they re-entered the golden light. The magic of the dance lingered in her limbs. Her skin still tingled where his fingers had grazed her. And yet, as they crossed the marble floor toward table 7 once more, she felt something else. Eyes. There were eyes on them, Whispers, subtle and clipped, stirred behind champagne flutes. Amelia tried not to look, but curiosity got the better of her. She caught the flash of a raised brow here, a murmured comment behind a napkin there. A woman in a crimson dress leaned close to a man in a gray suit and tilted her head discreetly in their direction. A group near the cake table went quiet as Lucas passed, then resumed talking too quickly. Amelia's stomach knotted. "Is it just me?" she asked under her breath. "Or are we suddenly the entertainment?" Lucas's eyes didn't flinch from the path ahead. "It's not you." That should have comforted her, but it didn't. Back at their table, she sipped from her water glass with hands that didn't feel as steady as they had an hour ago. Lucas seemed calmer, unbothered even, but his posture had shifted slightly, shoulders a bit tighter, jaw more defined, like he was holding something back. "You don't seem surprised," she said after a long pause. He glanced at her. "I'm not." She studied his face. "Do they always react like that when you talk to someone new?" A shadow crossed his expression, brief but undeniable. "Sometimes. That seemed intense. It comes with the territory." She leaned forward. "Which territory is that exactly?" For a moment, Lucas didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the dance floor, where couples now moved in messy twirls and less refined steps. The formal part of the evening was giving way to loosened ties and kicked-off heels. Then he turned to her, his voice quieter. "My life doesn't leave much room for normal." Amelia tilted her head. "Define not normal. I've built a company people like to talk about, and a reputation people like to exaggerate. They see my name and fill in the blanks, sometimes with awe, sometimes with envy, sometimes with fear." "Fear?" He exhaled. "Power makes people uncomfortable, especially when they don't understand how you use it." There it was again, that polished honesty, the way he didn't dodge questions, but didn't overshare either. It wasn't secrecy. It was discipline. A man used to being scrutinized, a man who had learned to keep some things for himself. "Can I ask you something personal?" she ventured. "You've earned that right." She hesitated. "Why me?" His brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean? Why did you sit with me?" "Stay with me?" "Everyone here clearly knows who you are. They expected you to be somewhere else with different people. People who match your world." A muscle in his cheek tensed. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Because when I walked into that ballroom tonight, everyone looked at me the same way they always do. With calculation, with expectation. Like I was a puzzle they wanted to solve for their own benefit." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "But you," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "you looked at your salad like it was a complicated decision. You looked at the bride like she was magic. You looked at me like I was just a man." Amelia's throat tightened. He continued, "Softer now. You made me feel human. Do you know how rare that is?" She didn't know what to say. So, she said nothing. Instead, she reached out, resting her hand gently on the back of his. He looked down at the touch, then up at her again. But before either of them could speak, a sharply dressed man in his 42nd approached their table. His presence was sharp, clean suit, polished shoes, and an air of subtle authority that marked him as someone who was used to being heard. "Lucas," the man said, nodding tightly, "we need a word." Lucas's shoulders stiffened. "Now?" The man gave Amelia a glance brief, but assessing, preferably, Lucas sighed, then turned to her. "I'll be right back." She nodded. "Of course." He stood and followed the man toward a quieter corner of the ballroom near the bar. Amelia watched them go, her stomach twisting with a sensation she couldn't quite name. The man spoke quickly, his gestures restrained but firm. Lucas listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She looked away, pretending not to watch, but a few moments later, she heard footsteps and turned to see Lucas returning, his jaw tight. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He sat down, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. "Just a reminder that not everyone likes surprises," he said, eyes narrowing slightly, especially when they involve someone unexpected. Amelia blinked. "You mean me?" He didn't answer right away. "My business partner. He's protective of the company, the brand, the image." She felt a chill creep in. "And I'm a threat to that image." Lucas's eyes met hers, sharp but not unkind. "You're a reminder that I don't always follow the script." She stared at the tablecloth, her heart sinking. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't. Still, I shouldn't be the reason people question your choices." "Amelia," he said, his voice firm but calm, "if being with you makes people uncomfortable, that says more about them than about you." She didn't respond right away. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin. Then, finally, she looked up. I'm not used to this. Used to what? Being noticed, protected, taken seriously. You should be, he said. His certainty unsettled her in the best way. He leaned in again, quieter this time. I don't want to scare you off. You're not. A new song began to play, softer this time, a ballad full of strings and silence, but neither of them moved to dance again. Instead, Lucas looked at her with a kind of gentle warning in his gaze. There are things about my life I can't explain in one night, he said. Not because I don't trust you, but because some things take time. Amelia nodded. I understand. Do you? I think so. I know what it's like to protect something fragile. He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he offered a single sentence that lingered like a promise. I'll let you in, just not all at once. And somehow that was enough. For now, the morning light filtered through Amelia's studio apartment like a quiet visitor. It crept along the hardwood floor, catching the scattered petals from yesterday's arrangements and the half-finished bouquet resting on her tiny work table. The scent of jasmine lingered in the air, soft and familiar. She was still thinking about the wedding, about Lucas, about how he had seen her, really seen her. It had been 2 days, and he hadn't vanished. Instead, he'd sent a message that morning. Dinner tonight. I'll send a car, dress for something comfortable. But let me surprise you. The message had arrived with a small bouquet of white peonies, her favorite. Though she hadn't told him that, she read the text 3 times before replying, her fingers hesitating over the keys as her heart pounded. Okay, I'll be ready. By 6:30, Amelia stood by the front door of her building, watching the sky change colors above the city. She wore a pale blue wrap dress, simple and soft, paired with sandals that had only a faint scratch on the heel. Her nicest pair. She had no idea what to expect. When the car pulled up, it wasn't just a car. It was a Blacktown car, polished like obsidian, with a driver in a dark uniform who stepped out and opened the door for her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Miss Rose? The man asked with a polite nod. She blinked. Yes. Mr. Sterling asked me to bring you to him. The drive was silent, smooth, surreal. Outside the tinted windows, the city shifted from the familiar buzz of working-class corners to wide avenues lined with glass towers and marble storefronts. The sidewalks thinned. The cars became sleeker. The pedestrians more polished. Her fingers tightened slightly around her clutch. When the car stopped, the driver stepped out again and opened the door with the same calm grace. Amelia stepped onto the sidewalk and looked up. They were in front of a tall, modern building with a mirrored facade that stretched toward the clouds. At the entrance, a doorman nodded and held the door before she could even touch it. She swallowed hard. This was another world. The lobby was silent but luxurious. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. A chandelier that looked like falling glass droplets hung from the ceiling. Every surface shimmered. Before she could fully take it in, a private elevator opened. Inside, she stood alone as the elevator ascended quietly, faster than expected, smoother than anything she had ever experienced. Then the doors opened, and there he was. Lucas stood barefoot in the doorway of what could only be described as a penthouse carved out of a dream. He wore a navy sweater pushed up at the sleeves and dark slack, casual, comfortable, effortlessly elegant. Hi, he said with a smile that didn't try too hard. Hi, she replied, her voice soft. He extended a hand. Come in. She stepped into the apartment, her sandals clicking softly against the dark hardwood floor. The space was open and airy, all clean lines and warm tones. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the city that took her breath away. Lights blinked in the distance. The skyline stretched like a painting, alive and endless. She turned slowly, her eyes wide. Lucas, this is... He chuckled. A bit much. She gave a breathy laugh. A bit everything. He led her toward a dining area near the windows, where a small table was set for 2. Candles flickered gently, casting golden light over simple white plates and folded linen napkins. I hope you're hungry, he said. I'm also slightly intimidated. Good, he teased. Keeps things interesting. They sat. A private chef brought out dinner, grilled salmon with citrus glaze, roasted vegetables arranged like art, and a dessert she couldn't pronounce, but adored. Everything was delicate and perfect and almost absurd. And yet, somehow, Lucas made it feel human. He asked about her day, listened when she talked about her coworker breaking a vase in the shop, laughed when she described a runaway cat that had nearly knocked over an entire floral arch, He spoke about his work only when she asked, and even then with a humility that surprised her. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked, gesturing around the room. He looked out the window, thoughtful. "Sometimes." "Of what?" "The view, the insulation." She frowned. "Up here, it's beautiful," he explained. "But it's also quiet, in a way that makes you forget what real noise feels like. It's easy to lose yourself in the height." She nodded slowly. "You mean you stop feeling the ground beneath your feet?" "Exactly." Their eyes met. "I think that's why I wanted to see you again," he said. "You remind me there's still gravity." She blushed. They stood after dinner, walking barefoot onto the balcony. The night was warm, the breeze soft. Below them, the city pulsed with life, tiny lights flickering like distant stars. "This view," she whispered. "I could stare at it for hours." "You can," he replied. She glanced at him. "I'm serious," he said. "Any time. It's yours too." She shook her head gently. "I don't know how to exist in a place like this." "You already do." He said it with such ease, such quiet certainty, that for a moment she believed him. But then reality crept in. Amelia thought about her studio apartment with the creaky pipes and chipped tile, about the dresses from thrift stores and coupons clipped from magazines, about the way she counted every dollar every week. This was not her world. She looked down at her sandals, suddenly too aware of how plain they were. "I don't want to be a project," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Lucas turned to her sharply. "You're not. I don't want to be someone you rescue from simplicity." He stepped closer. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" He took her hands in his, steady and warm. "It's me," he said, "choosing someone who makes me feel real in a life that too often feels staged." She searched his eyes. "But what happens when this wears off?" "It hasn't yet," he replied. "And I'm not interested in letting it." They stood there, hands entwined, surrounded by glass and stars and the quiet hum of the city. Amelia didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. But her silence wasn't distance. It was permission. And Lucas understood that. The wind played with a loose strand of her hair. He reached up gently, tucking it behind her ear. No performance, no promises, just the truth of a moment that neither of them had expected, and neither of them wanted to end. Amelia stood at her kitchen sink the next morning, rinsing the same mug twice without realizing. The scent of jasmine from her windowsill planter wafted through the air, but it felt like a fragrance from another lifetime. The night before lingered in her chest, like a song with no clear ending. Lucas's penthouse, the dinner, the view, his words. She had walked into that world, curious. She left it questioning everything. On the surface, nothing had changed. She was still Amelia Rose, florist, renter of a one-room studio with creaky floors and a bathroom mirror slightly tilted to the left. Her shelves were filled with books from second-hand stores and chipped mugs that didn't match. She still left the heater off on warmer nights to save money, still packed her lunch in the same container since college. But something inside her had shifted because now she knew exactly what it looked like to live above the clouds, what it felt like to stand on marble floors and sip wine chosen by a sommelier whose name she couldn't pronounce. She had touched the silk of a world not her own, and it had left fingerprints. At the shop, everything felt louder, sharper. The snip of scissors, the rustle of paper, the creak of the cooler door. It all grated more than usual. Her co-worker Clara noticed. "You okay?" she asked, wrapping a ribbon around a vase of tulips. "Amelia hesitated. Just tired." "You look it," Clara said without cruelty. "Long night?" Amelia gave a small, distracted smile. You could say that. She didn't say more. How could she explain it? That her heart felt split down the middle, one half still spinning from the intimacy of Lucas's words, the other weighed down by the echo of her own doubts. That night, Lucas texted again. "Can I see you tomorrow?" She typed, erased, typed again. Finally, yes. The next evening, he picked her up himself. This time, no car service. Just Lucas in dark jeans and a worn leather jacket, leaning casually against his silver Aston Martin, parked in front of the shop. "You look." He paused, grinning, like trouble. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "You're late." Fashionably, he said, opening the passenger door for her. They drove out of the city, music low, conversation lighter than usual. Lucas told her stories from his college days, how he once got locked in a wine cellar during a fundraiser and had to call his sister from a landline to be rescued. She laughed, grateful for the ease, grateful he wasn't trying to impress her tonight. They arrived at a small restaurant tucked between trees on a quiet hill, with candles flickering in every window and a fireplace that crackled behind the bar. Cozy, intimate, human. She exhaled, relieved. But as the hostess greeted them, Amelia noticed the subtle pause when she said Lucas's name, the straightening of posture, the shift in tone, like something clicked, and suddenly they weren't just a couple on a date, they were his guests. They were seated at a table by the fire. The menu had no prices. The wine list came in a leather-bound book. Amelia ran her fingers over the silverware, suddenly hyper-aware of how unfamiliar everything felt. He noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. She smiled too quickly. Of course, but the truth gnawed at her. It wasn't just the restaurant, it was everything. The way the waiter deferred to Lucas, the glances from the other diners, the scent of cologne she couldn't name, the quiet pressure of trying to belong in a place that had its own language. By the time dessert came, she was quiet. He leaned forward. "Talk to me." She looked down. "I don't want to ruin the night." "You won't." She hesitated. "Then, I don't know how to fit into your world." He didn't speak right away. "You don't have to. That's easy for you to say, is it? You've never had to count how many meals are left in the fridge before payday, or fix your shoes with glue, or decide which bill can wait another week." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "You think I don't know struggle? I think you forgot it." That landed heavier than she intended. She looked away, ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That wasn't fair." "No," he said quietly. "It was honest." She nodded, throat tight. She started, then stopped. "I don't want to be someone you bring into your world like a novelty, a break from the noise." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You're not a break, Amelia," he said. "You're the only thing lately that's made sense." Her eyes welled up. "Then why do I feel so out of place?" He gave a long exhale. "Because my world is designed to keep people out." She looked at him. "And I've spent years letting it," he added. "But I don't want to anymore." They sat in silence as the fire crackled beside them. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing leaves against the window. He continued, voice lower now. "I know what this looks like. I know how ridiculous parts of my life are. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe." She bit her lip. "Just don't run," he added. "Even if it's scary, even if it's different." "I'm not running," she said softly. "I'm just adjusting." He smiled. "I can work with that." When he walked her to her door later that night, he didn't try to kiss her. He just held her hands and looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. And for the first time, she believed him almost. The invitation came in the form of a folded note inside a bouquet of wildflowers. "Let me show you where I go when the noise gets too loud." No date, no time, just that. Amelia held the paper between her fingers, her heart thudding with a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. Lucas hadn't called or texted since their dinner. Only this, but somehow it felt like more than a message. It felt like a key. That Friday, he arrived in person. He wore jeans, a worn flannel shirt, and boots that looked like they remembered mud. His car this time wasn't sleek or silver. It was a navy SUV with scratches on the sides and pine needles still stuck to the tires. "Ready?" he asked. She stared at him, her mind racing. "Where are we going?" He smiled. "Away." They drove for hours, the city falling away behind them like a dream, dissolving. Buildings turned to fields, fields to woods. The air changed, too. Less exhaust, more earth. Amelia rolled down the window and let the wind tangle her hair. For the first time in days, she didn't feel watched. She didn't feel small. She just existed. Lucas played music she didn't expect. Old acoustic tracks, indie folk songs she'd forgotten she loved. They didn't talk much, and that was okay. The silence between them had grown comfortable. Eventually, they turned onto a dirt road flanked by tall trees and winding fog. At the end of it stood a cabin, modest, weathered, and surrounded by nature so still, it made Amelia hold her breath. "This is yours?" she asked, stepping out. He nodded. "My grandfather built it. I keep it the way he left it." The lake shimmered behind the trees, catching the last rays of daylight. A small wooden dock reached into the water like an open hand. Birds chirped somewhere above. The only sound was nature itself. Amelia wrapped her arms around herself. "It's beautiful." Lucas grabbed their bags and gestured toward the porch. No service, by the way. No internet, no signal, no Wi-Fi, no distractions. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure you'll survive?" He grinned. "Already feel better." Inside, the cabin was warm in the way old places are, smelling of pine, smoke, and memory. The living room was small, with a stone fireplace and two overstuffed chairs, a faded quilt draped over the couch. The walls held framed black and white photos of men in fishing hats and women laughing beside wood stoves. Lucas placed the bags down and looked at her. Hungry? I could eat. He cooked badly, but he insisted on making grilled cheese over the fire, and Amelia couldn't stop laughing at his frustrated expression as the bread blackened slightly. Don't say anything, he warned. I wouldn't dream of it. When they finally sat, legs folded on the floor, plates in their laps, Lucas handed her a sandwich with a proud grin. Burnt to perfection, he declared. She took a bite. Crunchy, bold. He nodded solemnly. Exactly my intention. Later, they curled up near the fireplace, the flames casting shadows on the log wall. Amelia rested her head against the arm of the couch, her feet tucked under her. Lucas sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching the fire like it had answers. You really come here alone? She asked. He nodded. Every time things get too loud. What gets loud? Expectations. People. The voice in my head that keeps a scorecard. She tilted her head. Scorecard? He looked at her. Success comes with rules. Keep growing. Keep proving. Don't show weakness. Don't slow down. And here no one knows my name. She let his words settle in. I can see why you love it, she said. It feels honest. He smiled. That's the point. Amelia stared into the fire. The crackling soot reminded her of childhood winters, of sitting beside her dad on cold nights with mismatched socks and stories about stars. It had been a long time since she'd felt something so real, so unpolished. They didn't speak for a while, just breathed in the silence. It was Lucas who broke it. You want to know the truth? She looked at him. I used to come here to be alone. Now I think I come here to remember who I was before everything got complicated. She nodded slowly. And who was that? He chuckled. A boy with scraped knees who thought money could fix everything. Can it? He met her chaza. No. The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside her. She looked down, fingers picking at the edge of the quilt. I used to believe that love came with conditions, she said quietly. What kind of conditions? Be good. Be small. Don't ask for too much. Don't break. Be easy to love. Lucas moved closer, kneeling in front of her. That's not love. It's what I learned. Well, unlearn it. Her eyes welled up. He reached for her hand, held it like it was something fragile, something rare. You don't have to perform here, Amelia, he said. You can just be. Her lip trembled. I don't know how. He squeezed her fingers gently, then let this be your practice ground. They stayed like that, hands clasped, fire dancing in their eyes. She had no words, only the sensation of being safe. Later, when the fire burned low and the only sound was the lake brushing against the shore, they stepped outside. The stars were impossibly bright, no city lights to outshine them. Just sky and water and two people learning how to see each other without distraction. Amelia leaned against the wooden railing of the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Lucas stood beside her. You cold? He asked. A little. He draped the quilt over her shoulders. She looked up at him, searching for some sign that this wasn't too good to be true, but he was looking at her like he had nothing else to hide. And for once, she believed it. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but something deeper passed between them. Quieter than desire. Louder than words. Trust. The city seemed louder after the lake. The honking, the sharp angles of glass buildings, the blur of people brushing past. It all hit Amelia differently now, as if the quiet from the cabin still clung to her skin, making the city feel foreign, noisy, artificial. Lucas parked his car outside her building and walked her to the door, holding her hand like they hadn't just spent the last 2 days wrapped in pine and silence. She turned to him, heart still half in the woods. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For not rushing anything. For letting me breathe. He smiled. I like your pace. She leaned in, and for the first time, kissed him. It was slow and steady. Like the lake. Like truth. Days passed, and things moved gently. They texted, called, met for coffee when their schedules allowed. Lucas visited her shop more than once, often under the excuse of needing inspiration, though he left with single stems and a new reason to smile. It was Amelia who suggested he join her at the charity gala. It's at the Botanical Gardens, she said, eyes lit with anticipation. I do their centerpieces every spring. Lucas hesitated. You sure? Why wouldn't I be? He smiled faintly. Because my presence tends to change the temperature of a room. I don't mind a little heat, she replied. That night, She wore a midnight blue dress borrowed from her boss's niece. It hugged her waist and flowed like water when she moved. She tied her hair up in a loose bun, letting a few strands fall, softening her face. Lucas met her outside the event hall, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, looking expensive without trying. "You look," he began. "Don't say nice," she teased. "I was going to say breathtaking." Her cheeks flushed. "That's acceptable." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The gala was held under a canopy of twinkling lights nestled among rose beds and manicured paths. Waiters carried trays of champagne and smoked hors d'oeuvres. Music played low and classical. At first, everything felt magical until it didn't. Amelia noticed it in waves. Subtle at first. A pause in a conversation when she approached. The glance a woman gave her shoes before smiling too sweetly. The way Lucas's name passed between guests like a currency. Sterling. Power. Money. Some nodded politely, but assessing. When introduced to her, others asked where she was from in that tone that meant, "What do you do? Who do you belong to?" She answered with grace, but the questions lingered like perfume that didn't suit her. When Lucas stepped away to take a call, a man in a tailored navy suit approached. "You must be the florist," he said with a practiced smile. Amelia blinked. "I am. I've seen your work. Lovely arrangements." "Thank you. Not the usual company Lucas keeps," the man added. Sipping his drink, she tried to smile. "He surprises people." The man said, nodding. "That he does." And then he walked away. The whole exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but it stuck. Later, back at her side, Lucas noticed the shift in her. "You okay?" he asked. Brushing his hand lightly along her arm, she nodded, lying too easily. "Fine." They danced. He held her like no one else mattered, but she felt them all watching. And when the night ended and he dropped her off, she didn't kiss him, just squeezed his hand and said, "Thank you for tonight." The next morning, Lucas stormed into his office, jaw tight. "You spoke to her," he demanded, slamming the door behind him. His business partner, Henry Langston, looked up from his laptop. "Good morning to you, too. Don't deflect." "You approached Amelia." Langston raised a brow. "At the gala?" "I merely introduced myself. You made her uncomfortable. I made an observation." Langston replied, "She's sweet and incredibly out of her depth." Lucas's eyes darkened. "That's not your judgment to make." Henry leaned back. "You've worked hard for this brand, Lucas. For your reputation, one public misstep, one wrong impression, and we're fielding questions from investors." Lucas's hands curled into fists. "You think she's a liability?" "I think she's a reality check." Lucas stared at him. "Then maybe reality needs adjusting." And he left without another word. Amelia didn't hear from Lucas that night or the next. She didn't panic, not immediately, but the silence echoed. At the flower shop, she found herself checking her phone too often. At home, she replayed every moment from the gala, wondering if she had missed something, said something wrong, worn the wrong thing, smiled too much, smiled too little. Had she broken some invisible rule? When Lucas finally called, his voice was heavy. "Can I see you?" he asked. "Yes." They met in a quiet cafe, tucked on a quiet street. He looked tired. She did too. He didn't waste time. "They talked to me," he said. "Who?" "My partners. My board. They think I'm distracted." She swallowed. "Because of me." He didn't answer right away. "I'm not embarrassed by you, Amelia," he said finally. "But they think you don't fit the image." She blinked. "And do you think that?" He shook his head. "I think they're wrong, but they have power." "Yes. So what does that mean for us?" He looked at her, really looked. "It means we're going to have to choose what matters more, them or this." A beat of silence passed. "I can handle whispers," she said. "I can handle glances, but I won't be made to feel like I'm your mistake." "You're not." "Then fight for me." "I already am." She reached for his hand. He gripped it tightly. The world wasn't going to make it easy, but neither of them was ready to let go. Not yet. The bell above the door chimed softly as Lucas stepped into the flower shop. It wasn't grand. It wasn't even particularly neat. Buckets of fresh blooms lined the floor. Ribbons trailed from open drawers. A small radio played an old love song in the background, slightly out of tune. The air smelled of lavender, eucalyptus, and sun. And Lucas Sterling, millionaire investor, son of glass towers and boardroom ceilings, paused. He wasn't used to this kind of beauty. It was quiet, unpolished, personal. Behind the counter, Amelia looked up. She didn't smile right away, just held his gaze. "You showed up," she said. "You asked me to fight," he replied. "This is where it starts." A slow smile spread across her face. Then, grab an apron. Clara, Amelia's co-worker, nearly dropped a vase when Lucas was introduced. "You're that Lucas Sterling?" she asked, eyes wide. He gave a modest nod, already half covered in green smudges. "Apparently. Do you own suits made of money or something?" He laughed. "Just overpriced jackets. Want one?" "I want your tax bracket." Amelia groaned. "Clara." "What?" "I'm being welcoming." They spent the morning assembling bouquets. Lucas, surprisingly, followed instructions well once he stopped trying to color coordinate based on stock prices. Amelia watched him carefully. He wasn't just pretending. He asked questions. He got dirt under his fingernails. He tied ribbons that were lopsided but sincere. At one point, he held up a small arrangement of tulips and daisies. "This is crooked," he said. "It's charming." "You mean terrible?" "I mean, it looks like something made by someone who cares." He looked at her. "Then I'll take it." She laughed. And just like that, the heaviness from the gala began to dissolve. That afternoon, Lucas stayed for lunch. Not reservations, not rooftop sushi. A small neighborhood pizza place where the owner knew Amelia's name and brought out garlic knots on the house. They sat in a booth with chipped red leather, paper napkins, and soda in tall plastic cups. Amelia folded her slice in half like she always did. Lucas attempted the same and ended up with cheese on his cuff. "You're very brave," she teased. "I like to live dangerously," he replied, licking sauce from his thumb. Their laughter blended into the clatter of dishes and background chatter. For the first time in weeks, neither of them felt like they had to explain who they were. They just were. Lucas leaned back, eyes softening. "I can see why you like it here." She tilted her head. "Because of the pizza?" "Because of how people look at you," he continued. "Not because they want something, not because they expect you to be anything, but exactly who you are." Her breath caught. "It's humbling," he added, "and grounding and, honestly, kind of addictive." She smiled, and he reached for her hand across the table. No flash, no audience, just real. Later, back at the shop, Amelia showed him the storage room. It wasn't glamorous, just shelves of vases, dried flowers, a fridge humming in the corner, but there, away from customers, she opened up in ways she hadn't before. "This is where I come when I need to think," she said. "When I need to remind myself that messy can still be beautiful." He leaned against the doorframe. "Is that what you think we are? Messy?" "Yeah," she nodded. "But in a good way." He stepped closer. "You know, I've spent years making everything look effortless. The suits, the speeches, the numbers, but it's all work. Exhausting, calculated work." She looked at him, eyes gentle. "And here," he continued, "I don't want to be perfect. I just want to be enough." She reached for his hand. "You already are." He exhaled, and something heavy left his shoulders. That evening, they walked through Amelia's neighborhood. It was loud in a different way. Kids on scooters, music from open windows, neighbors waving from balconies. They stopped at a park bench under a tree lit by string lights. "This is where I grew up," Amelia said, pointing to a faded brick building. "Third floor, 1 bathroom, 100 stories. Your parents?" "Gone now. But they made every square foot feel like home." Lucas was quiet. "I used to be ashamed of this," she added, "of where I came from, of what I didn't have." He turned to her. "You shouldn't be." "I'm not anymore. Because now I know what having really means." "And what's that?" She looked at him. "Love, safety, people who see you." He didn't respond. He just pulled her into a long, quiet embrace beneath the lights. Back in her apartment, they sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing cookies and cheap red wine from mugs. Lucas glanced around the small space, her books stacked sideways, her old couch with one leg shorter than the others, the Polaroids pinned to the wall. It wasn't sleek. It wasn't symmetrical. But it was hers. And he found himself falling in love with every corner. "You know," he said, "I've been in hundreds of homes more expensive than this." She raised a brow. "Of course you have. But this one feels warmer. Probably the radiator stuck on high." He chuckled. "No, it's you." She looked down, suddenly shy. He reached out and touched her cheek. "You don't need chandeliers or staff or statements," he said. "You light up a room with your presence. And I didn't realize how dark mine had been until you walked in." Her throat tightened. "You mean that?" she whispered. Every word. They sat in the silence that followed. Full, safe, whole. And for once neither of them felt like they had anything to prove. The invitation came again, but this time it wasn't flowers or folded notes. It was Lucas himself. He showed up at Amelia's shop one ordinary Thursday afternoon, holding a picnic basket and wearing a crooked smile. "Come with me," he asked. She blinked. "Now?" "No phones, no expectations, just you and me." She looked at Clara, who mouthed, "Go." So she went. The drive to the lake felt different this time. There was no nervousness, no guessing, just anticipation. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The trees leaned in the same way. The dirt road curved exactly as before, and when they arrived at the cabin, Amelia stepped out like she was coming home. The porch creaked under her feet. The door opened with that same familiar sound, but something was different. The cabin had been gently transformed. Candles flickered from inside glass jars placed along the windowsills. Twinkle lights were strung across the porch beams, glowing soft and golden. White wildflowers lined the pathway to the dock, and music, just a whisper of violin, drifted through the open window, subtle and slow. Amelia turned to him, breath caught. "Lucas." He held her hand. "I needed to bring you back here," he said, "because this is where everything changed." She squeezed his fingers. "You're not going to make me dance again, are you?" He smiled. "Not unless you want to." They walked toward the dock. It was dusk now. The lake reflected the fading sun like liquid fire. The trees stood tall and still. Everything felt suspended in time. At the end of the dock, a small table was set with 2 chairs and soft linens. Nothing extravagant, just enough. They sat. He poured her a glass of wine. She let her shoes fall off and dipped her toes into the cool water below. For a long moment, they said nothing. And then, "You changed me," Lucas said. His voice quiet but full. Amelia looked at him. "I didn't know I was asleep until I met you," he continued. "You reminded me how it feels to feel, not manage, not perform, but feel." She blinked, trying to hold back the emotion rising in her throat. "You let me be imperfect," he said, "and still worthy." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You are." He smiled, but it wavered. "I've had everything I ever thought I wanted, and none of it meant anything until you." He stood, her heart skipped. "I want the world to see what I see in you," he said. He walked around the table slowly. Then, on the edge of that weathered dock, surrounded by lights and water and memory, he dropped to one knee. Amelia covered her mouth with both hands. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, but he didn't open it. "Not yet. I could give you diamonds," he said. "And I will. I could give you a house, a name, a life most people only imagine, and I will, but that's not the point." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "The point," he continued, "is that I see you, and I want you to be seen, not as someone beside me, not as someone behind me, but as my partner, my equal, my heart." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single oval diamond set in a thin gold band. No fireworks, no glitter, just meaning. "Amelia Rose," he said, "will you marry me?" She didn't speak at first. She stepped forward, kneeling too, right in front of him. Their foreheads touched, her tears hit the wood beneath them, and she whispered, "Yes." Not loud, not dramatic, just true. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her. They kissed, not like the first kiss, not like a movie kiss, like a vow. Later, they sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket. Stars appeared one by one. The lake was dark now, still reflecting the last light of day. She leaned against him. "Why here?" she asked. "This was the first place I ever felt like myself," he said, "because of you." She held up her hand, admiring the ring. "It's beautiful. It's yours." They sat in the silence that followed, and in that stillness, neither of them doubted what came next. Not because it would be easy, but because they had found something rare, something that no money, no power, no opinion could replicate. Belonging together. The church was small, not the kind you'd find in magazines or on destination wedding blogs. It had creaky pews and chipped white paint. The windows let in golden light that danced across the wooden floor. And the scent of roses, fresh, not forced, floated in the air. It was exactly what Amelia wanted. 1 year after that first night at table 7, she stood in front of a mirror wearing a dress that wasn't designer, but felt made for her. Soft lace sleeves, a flowing skirt, and tiny pearls sewn at the wrist, just enough detail to feel sacred, not loud. Her heart beat steadily. Sophia, standing behind her, adjusted the veil. "You look like you," she said. Amelia smiled. "That's the goal." Outside, the world waited. Not a crowd of celebrities. Not a list of names Lucas's board had approved, just people who mattered. Florists, friends, a few of Lucas's colleagues who'd come to understand who he really was. Clara, in a blush dress, cried before the ceremony even began. And Lucas, waiting at the altar, he wore a tailored navy suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled. His hair was just a little out of place, like he'd run his hand through it a few times too many. And when Amelia stepped into the aisle, flanked by candles and the soft swell of strings, he looked at her like she was the only thing he'd ever gotten right. She walked slowly, each step a quiet vow, each breath a release of everything she used to believe she didn't deserve. When she reached him, he took her hands like he'd never let them go. The officiant spoke gently about love, about patience, about building something that could stand when the storms came. And then they read their own vows. Lucas's voice trembled once, but he didn't hide it. "I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me like I wasn't anything more than a man," he said. "You saw through everything, and you stayed, and you taught me how to stay, too." Amelia's eyes blurred with tears. "I thought I had to shrink to be loved," she said, "but you gave me space to grow. You never asked me to be anything other than myself, and somehow, that made me more." They didn't promise perfection. They promised presence. They didn't speak of fairy tales. They spoke of mornings when one might be tired and the other patient, of forgiveness, of dancing barefoot in kitchens and fighting about laundry and still choosing each other at the end of every single day. When the ring slid into place, it wasn't magic. It was choice. And that made it even more sacred. The reception wasn't in a ballroom. It was in a garden. Tables beneath string lights, laughter rising with the dusk, flowers everywhere, not in tight arrangements, but wild, blooming freely. Amelia had made each one by hand with help from her team. No florist was off duty that day. Lucas stood near the dance floor, talking to Amelia's old neighbor. He looked comfortable, even with dirt on his shoes from the grass. He laughed, leaned in, listened. He belonged. Amelia watched him from a distance. Her husband, still strange to say, still exactly right. Sophia walked over and handed her a drink. "You didn't just marry a man. You softened him." Amelia smiled. "He softened me, too." They toasted. Later, as the sun slipped behind the trees, Lucas found Amelia again. "Dance with me always." They moved slowly under the lights, surrounded by people who had rooted for them and people who had once doubted and now stayed quiet. There were no grand speeches, no confetti, just hands, just rhythm, just presence. And then, the moment Amelia had once only imagined, she looked in the mirror at the end of the night, makeup a little smudged, her dress slightly wrinkled, hair coming undone. She looked tired, glowing, whole, and for the first time in her life, she saw a woman who had never needed to be more to be loved, because she had finally let herself be seen and had loved someone back without shrinking. A fairy tale, maybe, but one with roots in the earth, one that didn't need castles, just truth and the quiet, steady miracle of being chosen every single day. She didn't win by molding herself, nor by shining brighter than the others. She won in the silence of simple gestures, in love that didn't shout, but stayed. She won when she danced with him on the grass with the wrinkled dress and bare feet, because in the end, real fairy tales don't have crowns. They have hands held and choices made every day.